of the common purpose to gain control by means that include the unlawful intimidation and mistreatment of those deemed to be opponents in an extraordinarily vast array of evidence. Communiques, public declarations, regulations, orders, intelligence and military police reports, notebooks, journals, meetings, inspections, appointments and promotions, efforts to deflect, deny, and justify crimes, the accused participation in crimes, and of course, witness evidence. From the beginning of the indictment period to the end, throughout different phases of the conflict, whether the common purpose was being publicly proclaimed or being modulated in response to concerns about the international community, the targeting of collaborators continued. I will address 1998, and Ms. Lawson will then address events of 1999. But to fully understand what happened from March 98 onwards, it's helpful to know a bit about who the accused were at that time and how they got there. Because unlike many who would join the KLA during this period, the accused were not galvanized by the killings of the Yashari family to volunteer. Instead, they were the pioneers of the KLA who had led it to that point. As another core member of the KLA General Staff said, Hashim Thachi, Kadri Vaseli, and Recep Salimi were among the few protagonists who were part of a, quote, common structure and who, quote, started the war and finished it. Jakub Krasniqi, a respected public figure, joined that structure later but would play a comparably important role. It began, as Jakub Krasniqi explained in his first appearance as KLA spokesperson, with the LPK. And this is subtitled, so there is no need for translation. The LPK is the political force, as Mr. Krasniqi noted, that deserves uncontested credit for founding the Kosovo Liberation Army. As Azim Sula said in P. 1875, the KLA could be regarded as a creation of the military wing of the LPK. Levizia Popolare e Kosovos, or LPK, was an underground political group which considered that pan-Albanian liberation would not happen without armed conflict. And in the early 90s, it tasked a handful of members to form its military wing. And as Ilaz Kadoli noted in P12, quote, to start armed attacks against Serbian army, police, and collaborators with the Serbian occupier in Kosovo. Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli, friends since their early student days, were key players in that process at the forefront of the KLA from the beginning. That's P4216. As Mr. Thaçi explained in his SPO interview, echoing what he had also told the ICTY, quote, "When we started our activity in 1992-93, we were a small group of people. We were patriots. We were from Drenica. I was one of the people that established it, one of the founders, and this is well known." And similarly, Mr. Veseli explained in his SPRK testimony, quote, "I was a member of the KLA from the very beginning. I am actually one of the founders. I was a member of the KLA main HQ since the beginning." Mr. Thaçi had a big role from the start, leading organized activities, and Mr. Veseli recalled how during the period until 1994, he and Mr. Thaçi would go back and forth to Albania. In 1994, they left for Switzerland, and from then until March 98, they would come to Kosovo every 3 to 4 months, spending 2 to 4 weeks at a time. That's P739.4. Thaçi and Veseli had many important duties during this time, maintaining contacts, organizing, and bringing in arms, including 7 of the 12 RPGs used in the synchronized attack on 12 Serbian police stations in September 1997. That's P4200 and P1883. Mr. Thaçi earned a reputation as one who bridged the gap between fighters in Kosovo and planners in exile, as a biographer of the KLA noted after consulting extensively with Mr. Thaçi and other leaders. As Mr. Veseli said in P4216, Thaçi was someone who not only led politically, but, quote, put himself in danger, and, quote, is a fighter and at the same time a political leader. Recep Salimi, another founding member of the General Staff, was known for his close connection to Adam Yashari and his role as one of the earliest participants and organizers in battle, including his organization of and participation in the synchronized attacks in September 97. And as Mr. Salimi himself observed in P761.4, someone who enjoyed widespread respect and credibility among the fighters. This background and stature was reflected in the description by one well-placed witness of Thaçi, Veseli, and Salimi as, quote, the strong men of the KLA. That's P1097.9. And why Ramush Haradnai included Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli, and Recep Salimi among his 4 proposed candidates for commander of the KLA. A leader of the KLA, as one witness made clear, was one at the inception or core of the idea of war, and who had established or formed the KLA more than anyone else. That's P1136.4. As mentioned, Jakub Krasniqi also enjoyed widespread respect, in particular as a former political prisoner. Although he had maintained a legal profile with the LDK during the 90s, he had made contact with Adam Yashari in 1991, had been involved with the KLA since 1993, that's P186, and has explained that he joined the General Staff no later than the beginning of 1997, that's P794, thus bringing the accused together. And throughout, their work was collective in nature. As Kadri Veseli said, quote, We have had our responsibilities during the entire time in the period 92 through 98. We had our general staff and the operational staff of the UCK. We did not have separate duties, but all did whatever we could. Recep Salimi also underscored in his SPO interview that decisions were made collectively. And Sokol Bashoda noted in his ICTY interview that collective decision-making applied to decisions about collaborators. The period from the mid-90s to March 1998 was marked by increased organization and armed attacks, as well as determined efforts to ensure that the world knew what the KLA was doing and to magnify the intimidating impact of armed attacks to the full. General or central staff communiques over the next 3 to 4 years disseminated a consistent message. The general staff sought the independence of Kosovo. It would continue until final victory. Political parties who considered signing for autonomy would be, quote, punished as a traitor. It was only the KLA General Staff which had the right to govern and lead in Kosovo, and those now on, quote, the other side must support their struggle or receive their, quote, deserved punishment. The occupiers' collaborators would be dealt with mercilessly, and armed units were carrying out attacks on those collaborators. And I refer your honors, for example, to P269, ET.1, 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 15, P274, P277, and P279, as well as P4290. Now, the communiques revealed that these particular attack collaborators included Serbs labeled as colonizers, member of the Serbian Socialist Party who had made a commemorative speech at the funeral of someone executed by KLA units, the rector of the Serb University in Pristina and his personal driver, persons allegedly known for open collaboration with the occupiers' bodies or for other unspecified anti-nationalist activity. These targets were in line with the extremely broad scope of collaboration as communicated by the General Staff. For example, those who, quote, blindly serve the foreign enslavers, or, quote, undermine and jeopardize the fate of our liberation war. That's P269.15. There are instances in which Mr. Krasniqi or others assert that collaborators are people who serve the police and the soldiers. Now, first, even this false limitation cannot serve to justify the crimes, as you'll hear later from Mr. Potch. But second, the evidence, as always, must be assessed as a whole, and there are many more communications and statements that make clear that collaborators included all who were deemed to serve or bow to the occupier. Mr. Krasniqi, for example, made clear in ICTY testimony, that's P794, that collaborators were, quote, the stooges of the Serb regime who served this violent regime, that they were, quote, numerous in the economic, cultural, and political spheres, as well as the security spheres, and included all those who had done harm to the political and military actions of the KLA. He noted also that the Serbian regime apparatus couldn't function in Kosovo only through its police and soldiers, and explained that, quote, this apparatus extended its tentacles to all the pores of public administration. The defense has attempted to dismiss the communiques as, quote, propaganda, a word they use as a euphemism for untruthful. That claim is belied by the evidence. First, you can find multiple examples of such corroboration in paragraphs 1473 through 1480 of our final brief. And while the communiques may have exaggerated the extent of KLA's success or downplayed difficulties, Mr. Krasniqi testified that the basic facts were accurate and in fact validated by other media reports. That's at P800. Indeed, Mr. Krasniqi specifically confirmed in P794 the substance of a number of communiques and could not think of a single communique he considered not to have actually been issued by the General Staff. As Mr. Krasniqi agreed when testifying before the ICTY at P795, page 3420, propaganda is, quote, an organizational program of publicity or selected information to propagate a doctrine or practice. And that is exactly what the communiques did. Further corroboration of the communiques is found in the ICTY evidence of Sokol Bashoda at P 1870.3. Asked the simple question how collaborators were dealt with, he explained that, quote, by a decision of the General Staff, measures were taken against them, unquote, which were, quote, intended to convey the message that no one should behave this way again. And he continued, quote, and the General Staff in the communiques would announce that other people who behaved in the same way should take care not to do so. Collaborators, he explained, were given a warning, and only if they failed to stop, punitive measures were taken. And asked what those punitive measures were, quote, in most cases, decisions were made to kill them, unquote. And you can see an example of precisely that in Communique 28. Quote, the KLA Central Staff took the decision to have them executed after they had been warned earlier to quit their collaboration with occupiers and in line with KLA Central Staff decision published in Communique number 27. One of the victims was an MP of the Socialist Party of Serbia. Zara Ikasovis, an LPK organ, concluded that his liquidation indicated that, quote, the Albanian people is determined on its road to settle the scores with all those that obstruct the sun of freedom, unquote. And in an example of both the breadth of the definition and the effort to maximize the intimidating impact, Communique number 28 also declared that these executions should serve as a warning to all collaborators and traitors, quote, especially those who, under the pretext of being pressured by certain international power centers, are likely to make deals to sign agreements with occupiers contrary to national interests. Another example is Communique number 29. Quote, the first assassination was carried out on 13 January of this year, where our guerrilla units executed the collaborator of the Serbian police, Fazli Hassani from Brabanic Mitrovica. This decision was taken following a long review of his anti-nationalist activities. And again, a broad warning to a wide audience of potential collaborators. Quote, this is the last time we are appealing to the occupiers' collaborators to give up their shameless path. Otherwise, the people's revengeful arm shall strike them mercilessly anywhere and everywhere. The defense has emphasized that Bashoda told this court that he was only speaking hypothetically, only musing. Any fair reading of his evidence before the ICTY, however, reveals that this is simply not the case. First, it is crystal clear that he is responding to the question that was asked by simply relating what happened for much of his answer. And even after the moment to which the defense points as evidence of hypothesizing, Bashoda stated flatly about collaborators who were warned, quote, and some of these people respected the warnings and some no, unquote. And that's at page 19 of P 1870.3. The defense also asserted, that's the Salimi brief, paragraph 594, that Bashoda recanted his evidence concerning the collective decision-making of the general staff in relation to collaborators. In fact, he confirmed it. Despite unmistakable efforts to water down the level of specificity in detail as the import of his evidence became more apparent, Bashoda nevertheless acknowledged that what he euphemistically characterized as appeals to not collaborate with the enemy were indeed collective decisions expressed through communiques. That's T 22, 986 through 87. And he also confirmed that the communiques were widely known to public opinion as well as to KLA soldiers. Shortly after he became official spokesperson, Jakub Krusniqi said in an interview that he confirmed to the ICTY, confirmed its accuracy, quote, collaborators are warned that we will kill them if they continue to follow the wrong path. And he followed it up with the transparently false reassurance, however, as an army, we observe all international rules of warfare. That's P 809. Indeed, at its most important moments, the General Staff corroborated the targeting of collaborators over and again. For example, when the KLA came out publicly in November 1997, Recep Salimi emphasized to the crowd what the KLA had been doing, carrying out liberation actions against the occupiers, quote, as well as their Albanian-speaking collaborators, collaborationists. He also noted that those who take pacifist positions, quote, denigrate our holy war. That's P 1878. And when members of the General Staff made their first televised appearance in early March 1998, they made clear that they would not accept autonomy, issued a thinly veiled warning to the Kosovar Albanian government to hand over the funds it had gathered or face full responsibility, and noted that all the actions of the KLA had been directed against the Serb occupier, quote, and against the collaborators of the oppressor. That's P 4217. Now, this was the beginning of March, when the accused were at the very core of the still small group that had pledged itself to the liberation of Kosovo by armed force against the Serbian police, army, and collaborators and traitors. But the beginning of March was also infamously marked by the attack on the Yashari compound and the killing of Adam Yashari and his family, an event that sparked what all parties agree was the beginning of the explosive expansion of the KLA from its guerrilla unit's origins. Now, you'll hear from Mr. Quick in much more detail about the creation and consolidation of units by the General Staff during this time. For now, I'll simply offer a general picture. The General Staff, which for years assured potential followers and the public that they would not stop, even should the conflict grow bloodier and wider, acted immediately. As detailed in our final brief at paragraphs 25 through 27, Hashim Thaçi, Kadri Veseli, and a large group of LPK and trusted activists entered Kosovo, where those activists took up positions of leadership, organizing existing units, and forming new ones from the flood of volunteers who now wanted to join an army to liberate Kosovo, proud to take an oath to be a loyal soldier and to be punished by death if they violated that oath. At the same time, the General Staff strengthened and formalized existing relationships in such places as Dukagjini and Lap, and recruited and vetted professional soldiers to help in training and building the KLA. As Jakub Krasniqi put it in P796, the KLA began to expand from a guerrilla army, and it was the General Staff that, quote, had the responsibility to organize this army. This was indeed a hands-on period for the General Staff. As Bislam Zarapi noted in P605, before the arrival of the military professionals, the KLA General Staff had control of their units, but, quote, the way in which until then the staff exercised control had been a great burden to it, unquote. Now that reflected how active, engaged, and busy the accused and other members of the General Staff were. Zarapi himself had to wait around in Albania for quite some time, even after he was vetted and cleared, for Mr. Thaçi to arrive from Kosovo and take him in. And you can see more reflections of that in P1265. Now, this is not for public broadcast. This is a notebook seized from Recep Salimi. For various reasons, including the nature of third-party references to him and the difference in handwriting from notes assessed to be written by him, we don't assess this particular notebook to have been written by Mr. Salimi. Now, P1265 records various events from the 12th of May in the vicinity of Umira and Likots. For example, the establishment of the first military police station in Likots on 18 March, or a request that a military police unit be formed in Umira, or 2 posts to Suhareka converging to the base Cheliku, or Nui Batici asking to report on aid supply and family life. And you can find those at 65, 42, 44, and 45. And the notebook reflects throughout Mr. Salimi's presence, importance, and involvement, including at page 6541, motivation came for training, meeting with 10. At page 6542, motive, meeting with 10. 6566, motive for coming, to consult with 10 about arms supply and organization of the post. And also, I talked with them in Chabich, and they advised me to talk with 10. Or at page 6607, request to 10, a sniper has been promised to Hikuri Imasor. He is requesting that the promise come to fruition. And numerous other references scattered throughout the notebook. And just one more reflection of what Mr. Zarapi was referring to, bearing in mind that you'll hear much more on this subject from Mr. Quick. Think of significant battles or events during this period. So, in the aftermath of the Glojan attack in March, Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli were there. That's paragraph 672 of the final brief. Daychan in May, Kadri Veseli and Hashim Thaçi were there. P1355.1. Balachovac Mine in June. Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli were there. P1273. Rahovets in July. Hashim Thaçi, Kadri Veseli, and Recep Salimi were there. P 1355.2. Lapushnid Gorge, Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli were there. P 189.7, page 70. So in this burdensome way, to borrow Mr. Zarapi's phrase, the General Staff was building an army, including rapidly formed specialized units for special tasks: military police, intelligence, special units. And as we've discussed, the General Staff had for years been assuring the region, and particularly its potential followers in its communications, that collaborators would be tracked down and dealt with mercilessly. And that is exactly what happened. Consider again P 1265, the notebook seized from Mr. Salimi that reflected his presence and involvement. That notebook also reveals the focus on collaborators and suspects throughout, including for such things as having frequent contacts with a brother-in-law who is a Serbian policeman, or for meeting with 3 fellow villagers who were Serbs, or for insulting the KLA, referring to them as monkeys or thugs, or for having intimate relations with a police officer and a child with him, or for the recent acquisition of a phone. You can find those at pages 6591, 92, 6605, and 6609. Indeed, contemporaneous notebooks and notes are replete with reflections of the targeting of collaborators by police, intelligence, and special units. And just to name a few examples, P75, P74, P2455, P2623, P651, P2638, P1265, as I just mentioned, P1644. Now, the defense has urged you to disregard such entries, focusing on what may not be known about the notebooks and darkly speculating that they may have been fabricated. Setting aside the extent to which these notebooks are filled with mundane aspects of daily life and inconsequential detail, or so often require reference to additional contextual information for their significance to be understood, or even more importantly, that the notebooks must be assessed in the context of the totality of the evidence, they are corroborated both broadly and specifically. The trial record contains extensive submissions on corroboration of such items, including through item-by-item explanations in admissibility litigation and in our final trial brief. But for now, let me just give a couple of examples, if I may. Again, the next slide is not for public broadcast. This is P75, a notebook related to the Maastricht zone provided by the ICTY. And just flipping through its pages, you can find entry after entry that was corroborated during the course of this trial. And again, the following slides are not to be broadcast until I announce the next public item. Page 9244. The highlighted references were corroborated by witness 3873 at transcript T 22578 through 79. 9253 and 9256. Highlighted portions corroborated by W4371 at transcript 15253 and 254 and 258 through 259. 9254. The date was corroborated by AF 467. 9270. Highlighted section is corroborated by P 1381, which was seized from Jakub Krasniqi and confirmed by W 4752 at T 17355. 9274, highlighted portions corroborated by W4371 at transcript 15258. 9278, portions are corroborated by 4371 at T15257 through 58, and more. 9291, highlighted portions corroborated by P1417, which was seized from Rajab Salimi, and P3837, which was seized from Jakub Krasniqi, both corroborating the posteric numerical designation. 9295, highlighted portions corroborated by W4295 at 2116 through 619. 9298, corroborated by 4371 at transcript 15257. 9249, highlighted sections corroborated by witness 3873 at T22577 through 579. 9301, Dukagjini zone code is corroborated by P1417 and P319, seized from Mr. Krasniqi and Mr. Salimi. And one more, 9269. Here we see Adrenat's victim as corroborated by W4489 at transcript 11772 through 774. That victim also appears in P74, another notebook. And here he appears under, quote, notes about Ardit's information, unquote, which concerns suspicious persons and collaborators. And we know that from the evidence that Ardit or Arditi was a member of the Vrin local staff intelligence who was indeed tasked with what P74 reveals him to be doing, the identification of suspected collaborators. And there also, we see highlighted the name of another suspected collaborator. That's in the middle of the page to the left. And now looking at P1112, we see those same two names. P1112 was seized from Jakub Krasniqi. Or perhaps instead of a notebook, let's look at collected notes, also not for public broadcast. P1644 are notes seized in Likovce, Lausha, and Aučareva during operations of the Serbian MUP in the first week of August, during the offensive that overran KLA headquarters following the attack on Rohovec. As Sokol Bashota told the ICTY, the KLA had written materials and, quote, then there were a lot of offenses and a lot of things were lost. And we see on 098615 through 98619, the information on these pages, Your Honors, was corroborated by W4337 at transcript 5310 through 19 and by P283. At 98618, witness 4290 confirmed his signature, and he did that at transcript 2505 through 07. And the references to asking Daya and Haki for weapons are corroborated by the information you can find at paragraphs 462 through 463 of our final brief. At page 98621, the 6 names highlighted here can also be found in P2459, listing the same 6 as, quote, persons being looked for.
against your microphone, against the... Thank you.
Is there still difficulty hearing? Okay. Turning to page 98-619 of P 1644, we see here the interrogation of one detainee who's asked about a number of people, including the highlighted name. And that person, the person being asked about, also appears in P 709 and P 1445, which were seized by UNMIC from Halil Chadraku, who you will recall was head of G2 of the intelligence service in the Pastrik zone. Those exhibits relate how a KLA soldier received a task in April '98 from her superiors, Femi Ladrossi, Musa Yashari, and Yahir Damaku, as a condition for joining the KLA. The task was to liquidate a skriptful, a term used to denote collaborators, also used by Recep Salimi in his November 1997 speech. And that skriptful was the person whose name you saw in 1644. The assignment was carried out, but the victim survived. When told in August 1999 that she'd be transferred to Drenica, the soldier was concerned because that's where the victim, who knew she was the attacker, lived. So the soldier then sought the assistance of Mr. Chudaku, who wrote to Tahir Sanani at the Pastrik Zone Command, urging that the soldier be protected in light of her service. Sanani wrote back that she was to take up her duties, quote, only after receiving the written order from Chief Lully. And continuing with P 1644, 98623 to 6225 are 3 pages. And on those 3 pages, you see the names of three men, names and personal details of 3 men abducted on 3 separate days from 3 separate locations, as described in paragraph 314 of the final brief. And at 98620, here you see a list of questions. When did you first hear of the KLA? Who's in the KLA? What do you think about the Albanian people? And so on. And in P 1499, a chilling video, we see those same questions being asked of those men and of a 4th man. That video gives you a small insight into the despair and helplessness of being detained and fearing, or even worse, knowing what awaits. And you can watch one of those men as he says, quote, I am destroyed, a living destroyed man. Just the thought that your little children are waiting and that I cannot bring up my children through life tomorrow. And on page 98615, we can see how the 4th man, a 58-year-old retired accountant, got there. Brought in by the Plumba unit, which was led by Ferit Shala and which reported directly to the General Staff, and to which Recep Salimi assigned codes, and received by Sahit Yashari, who you heard on video in May 1998, saying, the military police of Kosovo Liberation Army are professionally prepared and always ready to carry out the orders given by the General Staff of Kosovo. Those 4 men were never seen alive again. These overlapping strands of evidence, among so many others, reflect not only the extraordinary body of evidence that has been introduced, but the manifold ways the common purpose and those behind it manifested itself over and over and over. And during this time, the message from the General Staff about collaborators remained the same. We are targeting collaborators. Communique number 47, and this is public, issued on 12 May, stated that during the months of March, April, and May, at the orders of the Kosovo Liberation Army General Staff, a number of attacks were also carried out against certain Albanian collaborationists who, despite earlier warnings, had not given up on their anti-nationalist path. And you'll recall that, among other things, this was the period of the attack we just referred to, orchestrated by Damaku, Ladrossi, and Yashari. Communique number 48, issued on 19 June 1998, stated that by order of the General Staff, military formations carried out armed attacks against enemy forces and, quote, also took punitive measures against some incorrigible collaborationist elements. General Staff spokesperson Jakub Krasniqi, who in his own words, quote, represented and publicized the policy of the General Staff and KLA at that time, P799, confirmed that the General Staff was targeting collaborators in an interview of 11 July, which he also confirmed in testimony before the ICTY was accurate. He was asked about criticism of the KLA by the international community for violation of human rights of Serbian and Montenegrin civilians. And he responded with a memorable combination of admission and attempted evasion, answering, quote, we do not go in for kidnapping. Even if some people have suffered, these have been more Albanian collaborators than Serbian civilians. That's at P793. All of this at the same time that the General Staff was preparing and disseminating regulations that codified the targeting and, quote, merciless treatment of opponents. Now, the defense has also asserted that what was called the KLA was merely a collection of disparate and autonomous units, and thus any detentions of and crimes against opponents cannot be attributed to the accused. But the KLA and the General Staff from its inception comprised a close-knit grouping with certain long-established strongholds. No one is suggesting that bringing all the village units under its authority occurred instantaneously. It was, instead, a process, and one to which the accused were devoted, and which was remarkably successful in a short period of time due to that leadership. But let's look at a few places where the targeting of opponents was unmistakably and brutally implemented to explore the question of connection between those sites and the General Staff. Likots was the Drenica zone's headquarters and the zone's military police headquarters. Find that in the SPO final brief at paragraph 636. It was a hub from which recruits were deployed to other areas, and indeed the General Staff was headquartered there from March until the end of May 1998. That's P776, 44 through 48. It also held a detention site that was well known and feared among the local population, which held civilian detainees including farmers, teachers, elderly persons, accused of such things as being collaborators, LDK supporters, spies and traitors because they supported Rugova, not leaving employment, or showing submission to the occupier by distributing birth certificates. Prisoners were brutally mistreated and killed. The commander of Likots was Suleiman Salimi, Recep Salimi's close relative, who in fact introduced him to Adam Yashari. In May 1998, Suleiman Salimi was selected as Drenica Zone Commander at a meeting attended by Recep Salimi, and his appointment was approved by the General Staff. Suleiman Salimi explained that, in addition to the many visits by Hashim Thaçi and Kadri Veseli and Sokol Pashoda, Recep Salimi was always present in the area. Find that at p. 1745. And in an interview at the end of July 1998, Suleiman Salimi was asked, quote, "Who deals with the execution of sentences against collaborators and abducted Serb criminals?" A question which itself reflected the open secret that opponents were being targeted. Suleiman Salimi acknowledged the detentions, but, taking his lead from Mr. Krasniqi, stated that everything was done according to military law. The deputy commander was Sami Lushtaku, an old comrade of Recep Salimi, who re-entered Kosovo with Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Veseli immediately after Prekaz. That's P. 771 and 773. He personally informed one beaten detainee that he and his father had been detained because of allegations they were spies, and he gave an interview in May 98 in which he acknowledged that, quote, "We have killed police officers, soldiers, and their collaborators." That's P. 1266. Sahit Yashari was commander of the military police, another longtime comrade from the early days of the KLA, and we've already referred to his allegiance to the General Staff. And Sabit Getzi. He headed a unit in the Drenica zone, including at Likots, and answered to the General Staff, and in particular, Kadri Veseli. It was from Getzi's house that Mr. Salimi went to deliver his speech for the KLA's first appearance, and whom Mr. Salimi met very often in the spring and summer of 1998. Find that at the final trial brief at paragraph 315. All participated in the mistreatment of detainees. Let's look at one more place before the break. As detailed at paragraph 676 and onwards of the SPO's final brief, Jablanica was a site where civilians were held in subhuman conditions and brutally mistreated because they were accused of being spies and collaborators. And there, the commander was Lahi Brahimi, a member of the General Staff with long-standing ties with the accused. Mr. Veseli hid in Brahimi's home in Jablanica in the early 90s, and it was Brahimi who proposed Veseli's alias Luli. From the mid-1990s, Salimi frequently met Brahimi and stayed at his house in Jablanica, organizing weapon shipments and planning military activities. Between 95 and March 98, Mr. Thaçi and Mr. Brahimi, one of Thaçi's main points of contact in Kosovo, met once or twice a year. Brahimi was also present at a meeting of the Dukajini Command, which adopted rules providing for the execution of collaborators with the enemy. When a group of village elders came to plead for the release of a prisoner, Brahimi refused them and asked them why they were not fighting, declaring Rugova a traitor and a supporter of Serbian authorities. And on another occasion, he accused a detainee and others from his village of being, quote, LDK supporters and, quote, traitors because they had fled an attack by Serbian forces. Brahimi himself took part in the arrests and mistreatment of detainees. And, Your Honor, this would be an appropriate time for a break.
All right, we'll take a half-hour break.
Mr. President, I just wanted to point out that some of our team may be coming in and out in the various sessions, and I wanted to let the panel know that in case the panel has any issues
Just
with
to do
that.
it quietly and not let the door slam.
I just in the breaks, not while we're speaking. Thank you.
We'll be back at 11 o'clock then. Thank you.
All rise.
All rise.
Be seated. You may proceed, Mr. Teeger.
Thank you, Mr. President. And for the benefit of the registrar, all the remaining slides will be public until I indicate toward the end of the presentation those that cannot be broadcast. Your Honors, perhaps we'll look at one more detention site during this spring through early summer period. And that's Lapushnik, as detailed in paragraph 698 and onward of the final trial brief. Over 100 civilians were held and subject to brutal and even horrifying treatment because they were labeled as spies and collaborators, including because they were LDK members. The Cheliku 3 unit operated the site, and its commander was appointed by and reported to Fatmir Limai, who himself was personally involved in the detention site. Limai joined the KLA in 1996 through his friend Recep Salimi, with whom he shared a home during their studies in Pristina. After fleeing Kosovo in 1997, Limai returned with Hashim Thaci and Kadri Vaseli in the immediate aftermath of Prekaz and took up command, operating under the authority of the General Staff, conveying orders from and reporting to the General Staff, P 1812. Limai publicly proclaimed that units in the area were under the command of the General Staff, told Toronto Television that it was his, quote, duty to repeat the position of the UCK General Staff that there can be no talks about Kosovo without the KLA, and later became a member of the General Staff as head of the Military Police Directorate. You can see that at P 4146 and at our final trial brief, paragraph 281. In Lapushnik, Limai told a detainee that he had been arrested because he sold wood to Serbs in Roma. That's at T20422. A notebook later seized from Limai's apartment contained notes on suspected collaborators, including a forester who was detained in Lapushnik and executed on the Berisha Mountains in late July 1998, P2018. Limai had frequent contacts with the General Staff. The frequency of his communication and contact was such that Recep Salimi assured the ICTY in defense of Limai that there couldn't have been a detention site there without his knowledge. That's final trial brief, para 599. Your Honors, whatever was happening in locations not yet under the authority of the General Staff during this period of rapid expansion, the common purpose was implemented in sites run by those they installed or appointed, who made clear they followed the General Staff, who they had known and worked with for years, and who knew best what they wanted. And speaking, as I cited Recep Salimi doing a moment ago, of being in places where there could not have been detentions without knowing about it, I've alluded to the accused extraordinary organizational efforts in this period, which put them in so many places so often. Let's just look at a few. As noted earlier, Thaci, Vaseli, and particularly Salimi were regularly in Likots in that period. Indeed, the General Staff was headquartered there through May, when the 4 men, abducted on 4 different days, were interrogated for purposes of propaganda, the province of the General Staff, pursuant to a prepared template. When the Balacevac mine was taken in June 1998, it was extensively covered by the media, documented in international reports, and widely known. See the final trial brief at 1097, paragraph 1097. Thaci and Vaseli went there after it was taken, and they can be seen in a still photograph reflecting KLA control and in a video with weapons. 9 mine workers were abducted by the KLA. That was no secret. Negotiations were held in a vain attempt to secure their release. They were never released and never seen again. Find that in the final trial brief at paragraphs 377 through 78. Just a month later, Rahavats was taken briefly by the KLA. Now, although the General Staff had concluded that they were not quite ready to take towns like Rahavats, someone jumped the gun, prompting a significant counteroffensive. The KLA General Staff, including Thaci, Vaseli, and Salimi, responded immediately, appointing Agim Chelai to command and participating personally. And you can see paragraphs 232 and 792 of the final trial brief. Over 50 civilians were abducted in Rahavats, Aptarusha, and Reti. Reports written during or in the aftermath of these record in a matter-of-fact manner the taking of civilian prisoners, referring, for example, to, quote, 22 individuals would be taken prisoner, 7 women would be released. That's P67. Indeed, the General Staff would later brag about releasing the detained women to the ICRC. That's P4155. But bragging about releasing the women begs the question of what happened to the men. And you can see the General Staff responsibility for that chillingly laid out in paragraphs 792 through 817 of our final trial brief. Now, the defense has argued that the evidence of a particular witness cannot be credited, suggesting a motivation that is frankly hard to square with that person's actual involvement, as corroborated by others, such as W498, or indeed with the risks involved. The detail, depth, and context of the information provided by that witness long ago is compelling and persuasive, particularly given the corroboration, including corroboration by victims, the number of units involved under general and direct General Staff authority, 2 separate KLA reports, P67 and P1329, recording in a matter-of-fact way the taking of civilian prisoners, that between the 2 major executions and discarding of bodies in the same area, an international who had heard from the ICRC in Malasheva about abductions raised the general issue of abductions and ICRC access to Mr. Thaci and Mr. Vaseli, with the still living prisoners in the police station close by. Mr. Thaci and Mr. Vaseli did not say, "What detentions? What are you talking about?" Instead, they blithely assured the representative, the international, that the KLA would respect the Geneva Conventions. And later, as mentioned, bragging about having released the women. Throughout the period I've discussed, spring and summer 1998, the targeting and mistreatment of opponents, which had been a hallmark of General Staff efforts even before March 1998, was evident everywhere they went and everywhere they installed their most trusted subordinates, as well as in their statements, communiques, and regulations. The attack on Rahavats prompted a fierce response by Serb forces, overrunning KLA headquarters and brutally forcing out civilians from those areas. Faced with questions about the extent and necessity of the suffering and the effectiveness of the KLA and its strategies, or simply what was next, the General Staff saw danger and opposition and cast deviations from General Staff dogma as, quote, special war. Special warfare was deemed to include such matters as speculation about the institutions that were to represent Kosovo, spreading information that created a feeling of panic, sowing defeatism, calling on people to give up weapons, calling for a temporary solution of Kosovo's status, and was to be dealt with mercilessly. The KLA and the Albanian people, declared the General Staff, quote, was being stabbed in the back by collaborationist and pacifist elements, unquote. In August 1998, for example, General Staff Political Declaration 7 warned of a, quote, merciless blow to anyone conducting special war by, quote, speculation on institution building, a project that the General Staff had embarked on in response to international interest in a single interlocutor and was determined to control. On September 18th, the General Staff stated in communique number 53 that, quote, various punitive actions are being taken against collaborationist elements who continue to serve the occupying rule. And on September 21st, in communique number 54, declared that, quote, all sorts of emissaries have put themselves at the service of the enemy by waging special warfare against our liberation war and heroic army, collaborationists and political activists who sow defeatism. Those two communiques bookended Chirez on September 20th. In Chirez and Vaitsa, Mr. Thatchy, Mr. Salimi, and Sabit Getsi, again, led the arrest, detention, and beating of parliamentarians conducting a humanitarian visit to different parts of Kosovo with the approval of Ibrahim Rugova. As explained in a KLA military police press release, quote, based on information from the KLA Intelligence Service on 20 September 1998 at about 12:15, the KLA military police arrested 13 syndicalist, institutionalist party representatives in the village of Chirez, Drenica, for their divisive, partisan, schismatic, institutionalist, anti-liberation war propaganda, for handing over weapons, and for a temporary solution of Kosovo's status, and noted that investigations were continuing against 3. And just in case the detentions and beatings failed to deliver the message, shortly before they were released, Getsi threatened to kill Agam Krasniqi in Thatchy's presence, and Mr. Thatchy himself threatened another victim for refusing to resign from his political positions, telling him, quote, even if you are free now, we could kill you in Pristina because we have our own people in Pristina. That's at paragraph 940 of the final trial brief. The General Staff continued its focus on opponents viewed as engaging in special war. In the first week of October, Mr. Krasniqi underscored in an interview the, quote, special war effort by those trying to justify a peaceful path by speaking about KLA losses, and thus trying, allegedly, to, quote, destroy the KLA, P 3713. On the 30th of October, LDK officials Jakub Kostrati and Sendescu were arrested. And you'll find at paragraphs 956 through 959 of the final trial brief detailed information about what happened to them. KLA military press release number 4 explained why. They had allegedly, quote, spread propaganda about surrendering weapons in cooperation with collaborators, namely Selman Benici from the village of Banja and Ramiz Hoxha from Belanica, who had been executed some time ago by the KLA. As Bartel Mahmoudi told U.S. diplomatic representative Larry Rawson in response to U.S. concerns about the detentions of these two LDK officials, quote, in this case, we have to do with 2 spies, collaborationists of the repressive Serb apparatus. They have been arrested because they have caused damage to our cause, unquote, and added that only the General Staff had the authority to allow anyone access to them. That's P 1090. Similarly, Walker was told by a General Staff representative during the release process, quote, these are 2 Albanian traitors whom we tried, and they will not do it again. That's T 2312 through 13. And the panel will recall that Salman Benishi and Ramiz Hoxha were executed, indeed executed, and left by the side of the road. A handwritten, quote, execution order issued by the KLA Secret Police Service attached to Hoxha's body read, quote, for collaborating with the occupier and spreading anti-Albanian propaganda, causing fear, panic, and hatred